This video is a follow-up video to my YouTube video on the Honeycomb Bravo Throttle Quadrant, how to create various configurations for Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. In that video, I said the following.
There's one step that you're going to want to do before setting up the various throttle profiles, and that is assigning the Bravo switches to what you want them to control. We're using one master profile to create all of the others, so you'll be copying whatever switch configuration you have preset in your starting profile. By default, the switch keybinds are exactly the same as the Alpha Flight's yoke, beacon, landing, taxi, nav, and strobe lights. Since I already used the Alpha control yoke, it was unnecessary to keep the duplicate switch bindings.
And that's pretty much all I said in my prior video about the switches. Since then, I've been asked several questions about how I set up my switches, so that's what this video is about. The first thing you have to do is decide exactly what you want the switches to be. And as you can see by my labels, you can tell what my switches are. And that brings up the first question people ask me, how do I create the labels? I'm using a Brady BMP 21 Plus label maker. You can buy this label maker on Amazon for a little over $90. I'm using the black on white nylon cloth 3/4 inch tape. You can create wire labels, circuit box labels, vertical labels, horizontal labels, various font sizes, so it's a pretty useful label maker to have. So today I'll be in the Baron G58 to go through the various switch setups. The reason why I'm picking a complex twin is because if you refer back to my prior video, the complex twin is the master profile by which all other profiles are created from. So you want to set your switches here and then duplicate them as you create all the other profiles. So here we are inside the cockpit. Let's go down to view all the various switches here. Now the first switch I'm going to bind is anti-ice. So I'm going to go into the controls, and inside controls I like to search by name, and I'll type in the word ice. This brings up a list of all the things that I could bind this switch to that has the word ice in it. You can see there's a set anti-ice and toggle anti-ice. How do you know which one to use? Well, you don't want to use toggle anti-ice, and I'll show you why. And after I bind a switch, I like to toggle it on and off just to make sure it worked. On is white, off is dark. Now apply and save, go back to the cockpit, and look what happens when I toggle the switch on. And this demonstrates the difference between a toggle switch and a set switch. A toggle switch is used when a key is just momentarily pressed, like pressing a key on a keyboard. The switches on both the Honeycomb Alpha Flight Yoke and the Honeycomb Bravo Throttle Quadrant are always on switches, so when the switches are in the on position, they're constantly sending an on signal to the Microsoft Flight Simulator. So in order to use a toggle command with the Honeycomb switch, you have to turn it on and off real quick. This simulates the momentary press of a keyboard key. But the switches aren't supposed to be toggles, so let's set them up the proper way. So we'll go back to our controls menu, and in the search by name, type in ice, or at least attempt to type ice. There we go. And let's get rid of the toggle anti-ice. Clear the input, validate. Instead, we're going to choose set anti-ice. And I'll toggle it off and on a few times just to make sure it did bind correctly. Apply and save, and let's go back and see how it works. And as you can see, when you turn the switch on, the anti-ice stays on. And likewise, when you turn the switch off, the anti-ice turns off as intended. Now before I move on to bind the other switches, I wanted to just stop here and talk a little bit about the fact that it is possible to get the switches out of sync with Microsoft Flight Simulator. For example, anti-ice could be off, but I can manually flip that prop switch up. So it's out of sync, but quickly putting the switches up and then back down puts everything in sync again. And this is important to know because depending on how you start Microsoft Flight Simulator, if you're starting on the runway, everything is going to pretty much be in the on state. And if you're starting in a cold, dark cockpit, everything's going to be in the off state. If you ever get out of sync with the simulator, it's easy, just switch the Honeycomb switch to where it should be and it will immediately be in sync again. Now the next switch I need to do is my windshield or window de-ice. And for some reason, this doesn't work as I was expecting. Again, I'm going to type ice into the search by name, and I'm going to look for, here we go, set windshield de-ice. I was expecting this to work. But when I applied and saved and I went back to try it in the cockpit, you can see the switch did absolutely nothing. I have no idea why, but there is a fix to this. Go back, and again we're typing ice, and let's get rid of the set windshield de-ice bind, and instead we're going to set windshield de-ice on, and we're going to set windshield de-ice off. And once again, I'll toggle it off and on, and you can see how that reacts here. Now let's apply and save and go back to the simulator and see how it works. And you can see now it works as intended. Now next up on my list is the pitot heat. So back to the controls menu and search by name and attempt to type pitot. There we go, pitot. And again, go to the set pitot heat, and we're going to bind the next switch. Apply and save, go back to the simulator, and test to see if pitot heat works. And it does. So that brings us to switch number 4, which I've selected to be my cabin lights. So go to control, search by name, and type in the word light. Now you can see there's a whole bunch of different lights, instruments, autopilot, exterior lights. We're going to scroll all the way to the bottom to interior lights. And here we're going to choose set cabin lights. And once again, we'll test to make sure that the switches work. So we apply and save, go back to the simulator, and I'm going to quickly change this to nighttime so we can test the lights here. Okay, it's nice and dark. And let's flip on the panel lights and the cabin lights. So my next switch is my fuel pump. So I'm going to search by name fuel. There's a lot of things that come up for fuel. I'm looking under the instruments and systems, and I'm looking for a set fuel pump. And as we scroll all the way down, you're not going to find a set fuel pump. So what are we going to select here? Well, scroll up, and I'm going to do a set electric fuel pump 1. But not only am I going to do 1, I'm going to set 2 to the same switch, and we validate even though we're getting the warning that it's used elsewhere. Number 3 and number 4. The reason why I'm doing this is for aircraft that have 4 separate pumps, we only have 1 switch, so I'm going to want all the pumps to come on with that switch. And because we bound multiple boost pumps to the switch, you can see the one switch actuates both the left and the right fuel pump here. Now if I just turn on one fuel pump, it's simply turning the switch on and off and everything's back in sequence again. Okay, let's do the last 2 switches here. The next one up is the yaw damper. Search by name, type in yaw. Too many things come up with yaw, so I'll start to write damp, and there we go. Set yaw damper. The last switch is the parking brake, so I'll start by typing brake. You can see set parking brake is right here. And let's go back and make sure it functions properly. So that's the primary switches for the Bravo Throttle Quadrant. To end the video, I'm going to go over a few of the unique customizations I made to some of my other button setups. The first thing I did was unbind the back course, or the REV button on the autopilot. Search by input and press the REV button to bring up joystick button 4. I'm never going to fly a back course approach in the simulator, so I'm going to repurpose this button to something much more useful. I'm going to use it to turn on and off my flight director. I'm going to search by name for Flight Dir, and then I'm going to toggle Flight Director, and I'm going to bind that to the REV button on the autopilot. So we're going to apply and save, and go back, and I'll show you what it does now. If you look up here on the PFD, you can see the Flight Director. I'm turning it on and off. The last thing has to do with binding control of VOR2. If I change the CDI to VOR1, this is controlled by moving the left-hand knob on the autopilot to CRS course, and then using the right knob of the autopilot to move the OBS back and forth. However, when we change the CDI to VOR2, which is going to read what is in NAV2 up here, moving the right knob back and forth does absolutely nothing. And there's nothing I can select on the left-hand knob that's going to enable me to control VOR2. So what I'm going to use is a unique set of switch and knob bindings to make this work. I'm going to search by name VOR, and it's going to bring up everything that has VOR in the name, and I'm going to look specifically for decrease and increase VOR2 OBS, which you can see right here. A quick note, the one in this OBI list that says fast, they don't work. You want to be in the VOR list, decrease VOR2 and increase VOR2 OBS. I selected two switches that will never be used at the same time, and that's the yaw damper and the parking brake. The yaw damper is only used in the air and the parking brake is only used on the ground, so it's a unique combination when used in the air. For the increase, I turn the right knob to the right, and for decrease, I'm going to do the same yaw damper parking brake and the right knob to the left. Now as I turn the right knob to the right and left, it's flickering the bindings for increase and decrease. I'm going to apply and save and go back to the flight simulator. You can see now turning the right knob will actually move VOR2. This is not quite as useful in an aircraft like this that has a EFIS glass display. It is more useful, for example, in a Cessna 172 Skyhawk with their traditional analog gauges. If I select the left course knob to course and move the right knob, I'm going to move the OBS for VOR1. If I push in the parking brake and yaw damper switches, now the right knob will control VOR2. So now we've reached the end of my tutorial on how to bind all the Honeycomb Bravo Throttle Quadrant switches, as well as a couple little tweaks I made myself. Hope you enjoyed. See you next time.